I've often noted that retro-style media is always nostalgic for a period roughly 20 years ago, hence 90s-style boomer shooters being in for a while, because it makes 35-year-old game designers nostalgic for that time they made a custom level for Doom based on their high school and ended up in Guantanamo Bay, but like a walrus in a food coma rolling down a hill, the nostalgia wave always moves on, and exactly 20 years ago the PC boomer shooters were seeding ground to the rise of the console shooter, and third-person shooters such as Max Payne, in which the camera hovered overhead like a fussy mum with an overly stocked first aid kit. Slow-motion bullet time combat was pioneered to compensate for the lack of a mouse and console users being generally slower of thought from all the time they spent chewing the paint off of their wavebirds, and the main character was rather self-indulgently modelled on the game's lead designer with a look on his face like he was hoping binge-eating sour gummies would help his chronic constipation. And now, inevitably, we have a new retro indie shooter that takes a very obvious and openly acknowledged influence from Max Payne, especially the self-indulgent bit, El Paso Elsewhere, designed by Zalavia Nelson, in which we play paranormal detective James Savage, voiced by Zalavia Nelson, as he bullet-time dual pistols his way through level after level of monster-haunted labyrinths to the tune of an original hip-hop soundtrack, composed and performed by Zalavia Nelson. And the plot is, James Savage has to save the world by confronting his evil blood-sucking vampire bitch of an ex-girlfriend. And if I were any of Zalavia Nelson's former partners, I'd certainly be narrowing my eyes at this point. Self-indulgent is the word of the day, and that certainly comes across over the 50-odd levels of James Savage's angsty monologuing in a voice
like a bloke with a blocked nose trying to seduce the microphone in the middle of a noisy building site.
The exact method by which his evil ex-girlfriend is attempting to destroy the world is a bit unclear. One might almost think that aspect of the plot was included solely to turn James Savage's masturbatory airing out of his personal issues into an act of self-sacrificing heroism. So this all might come across as a bit cringeworthy, especially when the self-penned hip-hop tracks kick in, and we hear lyrics that one might imagine scrawl across the back of Zalavia Nelson's high school homework diary. But get past all that, and El Paso Elephantine plays like a fun, snacky arcade shooter. Arcade being a nice way of saying repetitive, but it's sort of impressive that they squeezed 50 levels out of about 4 visual themes and 10 furniture assets. The Max Payne-style high-octane shooting comes across well enough, complete with slow-motion bullet dive, which you'll swiftly learn is completely pointless because you can turn slow-motion on and off at any time, and diving kinda messes with your aim, but hey, it looks cool. It's one of those games that's very hard to stop playing once you start. You say, okay, I'll quit after this level because I think my kids got into the steak knives, and then 4 or 5 levels later you're like, oh well, sounds like at least one of them's still alive. And I put that down to the game's simplicity. Explore a maze, shoot everything in it. It's like Pac-Man having a Vietnam flashback. And it flows well, because between the slow-mo and most enemies dying in 2 or 3 shots and ammunition boxes practically bleeding out of the skirting boards, it's a surprisingly easy game. I say surprisingly because when editor Nick and I first played the demo at GDC, we both found it really hard in a Hotline Miami kind of way. I'd hate to think Zalavia Nelson scaled the difficulty back before release because all the game journalists were crapping out at it. Game journalists in the middle of a convention who've been alternating between jogging to hotel room demos and freebasing heroin don't make a good control group. So final summary, El Paso Elderberry is a fun, if repetitive, callback shooter that's essentially the nightmare sequence from Max Payne drawn out for 6 or 7 hours, and while the story frequently has the air of Zalavia Nelson's GeoCities poetry page, that also makes it feel very personal, which I'd take any day over the usual committee-designed drivel that's about as personal as an industrial sheep dip. And of the 2 games I want to talk about this week, it is undoubtedly the good one, although frankly that's not worth much, because the other game compares unfavourably to a Ribena smeared with Qatar. The game is... Right, well, I have to pause things there because I had this whole review ready to go, but then a day before it was due, I was informed that the game's embargo date had changed. I didn't play any other games this week, nor do I have the time to make an entire other review, so please enjoy the scheduled review with all identifying elements removed. Why not have fun trying to guess what it is? Here's a hint, it's not Armored Core 6. A game I've been wanting to talk about because I'm pretty sure it's completely fucking terrible. Is what happens when someone tries to knock off Hades without having the slightest clue what makes Hades good. So it's a roguelite dungeon crawler in which descends through a sequence of randomized levels while collecting blessings from associated godlike entities, except there's only like 3 blessings total, so you usually get all of them in every run. And none of them do anything to fundamentally alter the core gameplay, which consists of running up to dudes and biffing them in the mush 7 billion times. It's a beat-em-up with a third-person over-the-shoulder camera, which isn't great for visibility, but is perfect if you're really curious about the contours of his bathrobe, and every room in every level is the same. Some shitty one-hit kill minions you needn't worry about, and 2 or 3 big lads with spongy health bars and basically the same attacks. You pick one of the latter and start duffing them up, but with a control system that feels like is immersed to the waist in marshmallow fluff and has the leashes of 2 large curious dogs tied to his wrists. And yet the game's still insultingly easy because the enemy AI is as formidable as a large curious dog trying to lick a piece of kibble out of a hairbrush. So in contrast to El Paso Emerald Hill Zone, It's the bad kind of repetitive. It's like trying to eat an entire bucket of gravel through a straw. I got through all 4 dungeons on my second go, whereupon the game went, "Oh no, a plot development! Go through all 4 dungeons again, but slightly bigger." So I did that without a single death, and the game went, "Oh no, another plot development! Time to take the fight to the main baddie. I don't suppose we do that by going through all 4 dungeons a third time. Hey, did you peek behind my DM screen?" This time through, I died once during the final boss because I committed the classic mistake of forgetting not to clip through the floor during the opening cutscene. Is the kind of bad that makes me paranoid. Like maybe I missed something. Maybe there was a checkbox in the options menu labelled remove shittiness. Maybe I didn't notice the tutorial message for the activate jetpack button. Because the alternative is that an entire studio got through the development and release of a game with a relatively well-known IP attached that presumably has its own controllers keeping an eye on things, and at no point did anyone else raise a hand and say, "Has anyone else noticed our game's a load of old fly-struck sheep placenta?" I don't know if I want to live in that world. I mean, what if I have a medical emergency around such people? They'd probably get confused and stick chewable vitamins up my arse.